virtually. So if he does, then we should have a quorum.
I would need the children.
I'm
Then,
Oh,
here comes one. Got Bob.
Oh, good, excellent. Okay.
Oh, welcome.
It actually looks like Lena has also joined virtually, so
Yep.
we'll give,
Lena and Hans.
perfect. We'll give one more minute for Matt to join as well. Hi.
I can't. Yeah.
It's
Oh, Turner.
It's Bob.
Oh, okay.
Yes. What?
So welcome to the library.
Oh, wow, it is.
How are
So many
you?
books.
Pretty good.
Yeah,
It's getting warmer.
yeah, retirement training. Well,
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to. I'm getting more requests for consultations. Your yards, so.
I actually thought of you this weekend when I was out in my yard with all the ivy and I was like, oh, but I already know what he's gonna tell me.
It is not.
You may have other stuff. I don't know.
I think
Yeah, poison ivy. We have a neglected area that we've been working on, but, oh, God.
That's
It's just a large mountain to climb. You know how you have to sort it, just piece it out, keep working, be diligent. I mean, but you look at it and it just gets overwhelming and you just wanna just go,
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have everyone here who is able to attend today. So Kevin, our chair, if you would like to open the meeting.
Certainly. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March 2024 Passive Recreation Lands Subcommittee meeting. We'll start with a roll call. I'm Kevin Conrad, and I'm the chair.
Ann Gascock, and I'm a member.
Bob Gale, LCAB member also.
I'm Allison Deans, the Buncombe County Parks and Recreation Director, non-voting member.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Harrison, Ag and Land Resources staff.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. Fly on the wall today. Rachel Sawyer. I work as Strategic Partnerships Director for Buncombe County, which does some of our other funding programs for the county. And one of my special skills is sitting off camera. So hello to those of you online who probably can't see me.
I guess I can go over on that. I'm Jill Carter. I am the Open Space Bond Manager and the staff liaison for this subcommittee. Matt, if you want to start us with the online.
Matt Fusco, Landscape Architect, Land Conservation Advisory Board.
I'm Bob Turter. I'm also with the Land Conservation Advisory Board.
And I think Lena, you're the last person on.
Lena Richards, sorry, I got a Teams message right when I came off mute.
No worries.
Lena Richards, County Parks Rec Advisory Council.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll do a quick approval of the January 2023 meeting minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? And then another quick approval of today's agenda. All in favor, aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, I'll pass it off to Jill.
Awesome, thank you. Can we reshare my screen now with the presentation for today? So just to give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll have an update on the bond itself. And then additionally, I have that score report template that we talked about in the January meeting, which is how you guys will be able to see all of the applications and the scores for those applications and be able to kind of instigate your discussion of which projects you want to dive deeper into. So first, with the open space bond update, I'm going to start with a quick staffing update because I think you guys will probably have questions and it might also guide questions for some of the other points. As you guys know, when the bonds were originally created, there was the intention that they were going to hire 2 bond managers one for this and one for the affordable housing bond, and pay us with bond funds. Unfortunately, we found out from our bond counsel that they cannot use bond funds to pay those two salaries. So I have been informed that as of July 1st, my position will be eliminated. So I will not be managing this process, but we are currently distributing my responsibilities amongst the staff. But, and that's part of why Rachel is here. She's helping figure that out. But Allison and Jennifer are also helping to figure out that transition. And yeah, so any questions or thoughts on that? I don't know yet.
Okay.
Well, we'll miss you.
Do you know you'll stay in the county or you don't know?
I don't know yet. So, I mean, there is a real possibility that if I secure another role, I might have to transition out of this one before July 1st. But I have this position until July 1st, and will help obviously make that transition happen in terms of how the responsibilities are distributed. Yeah, and of course, as we continue to figure out what that looks like, I will keep you guys updated. There may be different faces being the staff liaison for this subcommittee in the meantime. But you guys will be well informed. And if there's any changes that need to happen to like the process timeline because of this, you guys will be updated. And of course, I wanted to bring that up first because as we go through some of these other updates, if you have thoughts of what that looks like, you guys have been really instrumental in kind of designing this whole process. So you might have ideas of like, well, how's that going to be handled now? So please feel free to like interrupt and let me know your questions and your concerns, I guess. And yeah, well, it'll be figured out. So awesome. Okay. My screen is not sharing.
It's doing that now.
1 second. I apologize that my screen is.
Showing on my screen. It's not
Okay.
We want to keep Jill, but if anybody knows of someone in need of an extremely talented person. Jill. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Hey, Jill, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but we just lost, oh, there you go. So we have no sound here on our end.
Okay, hopefully.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
We've got it. Yep.
Awesome. Were there any questions or anything I missed from the online folks in that flip?
No, we caught everything until just the last 30 seconds. So.
Okay, great. Then I'll just move on with the update. Okay. So first big update was the two first conservation easements to be funded with the bond were approved in February. So those were the Lake Eden Preserve out in kind of the Swannanoa Black Mountain area. You guys might be familiar with that property. That's where the Leaf Festival takes place. And we were successful in getting funds approved for a conservation easement on 336 acres out that way. And then additionally, we also were, through our farmland preservation program, brought forward the Parham Fortner Farm through that process, which is out in the Sandy Mush area, and that's about 30 acres. So in total, we contributed 366 additional acres of conserved land using bond funds through those conservation easements, which gets us to just over 1,000 acres left to go of meeting the county's goal of preserving 20% of the land. So that was a big accomplishment.
And yeah, a huge shout out to LCAB.
Yeah.
336 acres is awesome. So that's a Southern App project and just really amazing. Super excited about that.
Yeah, and the commissioners were also very excited to see those 2 projects
And it's a great example of how the bond really made a significant difference because that project has layers and layers of funding to get it to closure. And previously, without the bond, there was just a big missing piece where they had exhausted all the other funding sources. And so this one literally might not have happened had it not been for the bond. So really very excited.
Who was the owner?
I don't know. Matt, do you know who the owner is of Lake Eden?
Not off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I'd have to go back into the file and look.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the I know they've done things in phases out there, and this was like a big chunk. So I think you can see that on that slide there, maybe.
it's the far right one on the map.
Yeah, there was another piece that had previously been
Oh, yeah.
secured, and then that's second half, or second majority.
So how much of that money was used?
So that was
250,000.
for Lake Eden, 250,000 for Lake Eden, and 150,000 for Par and Fortner Farm. So that's a total of $400,000 from the bond funds for those 2 easements, which means, and we now have 3 formally approved projects for the bond funds, including the Woodfin Greenway that was approved last fall, and that one was 1.27 million. So our total committed funds are 1.67 million. So we still have over $28 million left to allocate. So, and you know, the one silver lining of my salary is not coming out of the bonds is you now have my salary's worth of funding to go towards projects too. So that's good.
However, we don't have all of that to allocate because we do have the commitment on the 2 greenways. We don't exactly know that amount, but we do know that that money is also already committed.
Yes, thank you. That's an important clarification. But yeah, we, of the funds that are fully committed, it's about 1.67 million has been committed so far. And then I did just want to rehash on the project review and selection timeline. As you guys know, our deadline for the applications is coming up in just under 2 weeks on March 31st. And as soon as that deadline passes, there will first be a kind of initial screening of all of the applications to make sure they meet the eligibility criteria. I will be doing that. And also at the same time, there will be a legal review of all of the projects to make sure that legally they meet the bond requirements. I'm not too worried about anything not legally meeting the bond requirements because legal was involved in crafting those guidelines that were published, but just in case, it's better to catch it now than to like get to award time and find out we can't do something. So we'll have a legal review. And then as soon as that eligibility review is complete, the proposals rather, will be going to the scoring committee. And they will have the month of April into probably early May to review the proposals and assign their scores using the evaluation criteria that this subcommittee helped develop. That team, I apologize, Ag and Land should not be on that list. It's the first 4 departments are represented on the scoring committee. It's planning, maintenance, parks and recreation, and the human rights and equity team. They each have a staff person on that scoring committee. And again, we'll be using the evaluation criteria. Once they have completed their review of all of the proposals and submitted their scores, I will compile, or someone will compile all of the scores into the score report that we're going to look at also in this meeting. And that score report will go to all of you, and you'll be able to see the full list of proposals. You'll be able to see their average scores for the criteria. You can see the individual scores for the criteria, and you'll also be able to see the scorers' comments on the individual proposals. And so then we'll go into your review, which will happen in the May through July timeframe. First, like I said, you'll get that score report. We'll have a meeting. I'll make sure you guys get that score report well out in advance of that meeting so you have time to look it over, come up with questions and thoughts. And then there will be a meeting where you guys will be able to have a discussion and talk through that score report and talk about which projects you would like to explore further. And then based on that decision, the projects that you want to look further into, we will set up site visits and presentations with all of you so you can get more information. Additionally, throughout this process, both for the scoring committee and for this subcommittee, if you have questions that are not answered in the application, if you need a clarification about something, we, the staff, can help facilitate the conversation back and forth with the applicants and make sure that your questions are answered. But please don't communicate with the applicants directly for conflict of interest reasons. But yes, you are allowed, of course, to ask questions. Once they do the site visits and presentations, you'll be able to ask them questions face to face, obviously, but please don't go out and email applicants and ask them if they can explain something on the application. I or whoever is doing that role after me will help facilitate those conversations. And then finally, once you guys make your recommendations of which projects and the amount of funding you think should be funded, we will take that to the Board of Commissioners in ideally August, and they will make their decision. Any questions, thoughts about the project review and selection timeline, or what this is going to look like?
I have one, Jill. This is Bob Turner. Did I miss something? How many applications are in right now? Can you tell us that, or did you tell us?
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. So currently in our online system, we have 5 applications that are in that system. I do know of at least 12 projects that have expressed their intent to apply. It's just only 5 have started their application.
So is it 17 or it's 12 total?
12
5?
total, yeah, that I know of that have reached out to me. I do think there may be some others out in the ether that will apply that I haven't heard directly from yet, but there are 12 known applications. From past experience with these grant-making programs, I do anticipate that the majority of the applications will likely come in on March 31st or right before March 31st. So I'm not too worried about that current applications number right now. I think that will likely change. Of the projects that I know of those 12 known applications, the vast majority of them are improvements projects. There's several that are coming from municipalities within the county. There's several that are coming from nonprofits within the county who have a piece of land that they want to turn into a passive recreation park. Or it might already be a passive recreation park and they want to add additional trails or add some, picnic shelter, other improvements to that land. The vast majority of the projects fall in that category of project type. There are a few, I think 2, potentially 3 projects that I know of that are acquisition projects. So those would be projects that they want the county to acquire the land and turn into a passive park. But again, the majority of them are improvements projects. And of the applicants, again, the vast majority are either nonprofits or municipalities. I think right now there's about 5 municipality-led projects of that 12. And then there is one project that is an individual landowner. That's one of the acquisition projects. They're an individual landowner that wants the county to acquire the land for a passive recreation purpose. And then the request range is very broad. We have project requests that are as small as $80,000 and going all the way up to $2 million. I'd say the majority of the projects that I know of are more in the like $400,000 to $500,000 funding request range. But there are a couple that go up to as high as $2 million. So there's going to be a lot of funding requests for the money that we have available. So any questions about what I'm seeing so far in the applicant?
I do have another, go ahead, if someone else jumped in there.
I was just gonna say, is that the representation of the 5 or just of all that you know?
That's of all of the ones that I know of. The 5 are within that representation. I mean, still the majority of those 5 that are currently in development on the platform are improvements. And then they're mostly nonprofits and municipalities. And then, yeah, that range is also applicable to those projects. So,
For the acquisitions requested too, you said you thought there were a couple of them. Are they from nonprofits? Or just
one is coming from a land trust. One is an individual landowner. And then the other one is actually a nonprofit owns a piece of land that they want to sell to the county. So, but yes, those are the 3 acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
So Jill, can I ask a question to Bob again? So are some of these projects already involving land that's already been conserved? I guess there's 2 questions here. Are any of these requests so far, these applications for conservation easements? Or is some of this land already conserved? For instance, these improvements, maybe you can explain that project type again.
Yeah.
Would somebody have, like a nonprofit, have already land in conservation easements, but be able to come for monies from us for improvements? Is that
Yes.
possibility?
Yes, and there are a couple projects that are like that where there's already an easement on the property and they are looking for bond funds to be able to put in recreation improvements that fit within our definition of passive recreation and fit within the guidelines of their easement. And then there are several others where they have the land and they want to continue owning and managing the land, but they in this process want to put an easement on the land and make it a passive park. So it's definitely a combination. Both of those are eligible for our project type. And as we've talked about before, an easement is not the only contract mechanism that we can use to protect the land. There's deed restrictions, there's other legal mechanisms we can use in the contracts in order to protect the land in perpetuity. That's in addition to easements as a potential option. And yeah, there are several plots of land that are not currently preserved that are applying for bond funds that would then be preserved. And then there's several plots of land that are currently preserved and looking for funding to put in trails or I think there's a potential mountain bike spot as well. So I guess that would also be trails, but yes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm sure legal's already reviewed this, but based on what the voters voted for, and again, I don't remember the language that was used to promote it, but the improvements on conserved land would be justifiable use of the funds.
Yes, as long as they meet our definition of passive recreation improvements. So they still have to have, that minimal impact on the natural landscape. They still have to follow acceptable techniques for those improvements. But then they would also have to fall within the restrictions. So there is one applicant that I know of that has a plot of land that's currently under conservation easement and they want to put hiking trails on that plot of land. Their conservation easement terms allow them to put those trails and to use that land for those passive recreation purposes. So that is an allowable expense from the bond funds.
This is sort of getting into the weeds a little bit more on that question, but so if an entity wants to build trails, they've got like topography, they might be allowed to build, like you see on some of the trails in wilder areas, stone steps, natural stone steps, but they wouldn't be allowed to be pouring footings and concretes and railings and things like that kind of thing, right?
Correct. But it has to, and this is why we have parks people on our exploring committee too, to understand like what the, I guess, impact of different improvements types are, right? So, somebody wouldn't be able to take a piece of land and put like a concrete playground or
Visitor
something.
center.
It's gotta be within the spirit of the.
That's what I
recreation,
thought.
Yeah.
We've been through all that. I just a refresher there.
However,
I do, go ahead. I was just gonna say, it depends also on ADA accessibility.
Oh, yeah,
If someone is making a request,
Right.
and in order to meet those guidelines, these requirements required a poured span of X amount, I think that would be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
That's
no, that's exactly what I was gonna say, yeah.
that's okay.
We do make allowances for ADA compliance.
Just not construction creep.
Yeah, exactly. And with the awards, we would build some of those restrictions into the contracts for the funding as well, right? So like, we would make sure that how the contract language is crafted prevents them from being able to do some of that construction creep. That would be outside of the spirit of the bond and the passive recreation.
So one more question, Joe. It sounds like then a land conservation or a nonprofit, it could be a land conservation organization that currently owns land that's already conserved. They could sell the land to the county under this bond fund, the monies, right? Is that a project that's currently underway now, or is that, for a nonprofit, they may free up or get some extra cash to do other work, but is that something that's a possibility?
I think that is a possibility, yes. I don't know of any, unless there's one specific project that I think you're trying to talk about, I don't think there's any projects that fit that scenario that I know of right now.
Well, I thought you mentioned that there was a nonprofit that currently owns land that wants to use our funds for acquisition. The county would acquire the property
Yes.
from a nonprofit.
But that land is not currently under conservation.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
And as far as the definition of conservation, because those on this board that are coming from a conservation background, like I'm assuming those are more legally binding terms and have like concrete definitions, whereas the general public may use conservation and preservation more colloquially. For this process, are we held to like a legal definition of what conservation is, or is it more along the lines of like, well, no one's building buildings here, so.
I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. I would say like there are legal mechanisms, I don't know if it's legal definition, but there's legal mechanisms that protect the land from development and certain types of development. And that will come out of these contracts, right? Because we've had these conversations about how we don't want to fund a project on a piece of land that then in 5 years gets turned into like a development or something. And so in order to be abiding by the legal terms of receiving this funding, they would have to keep the land conserved and like protected from that development in accordance with like the spirit of the bond and with the contract terms. That'll be a terms in the contract. So let's say we say, we're gonna give you this $400,000 to acquire this land, or that's not even acquisition, to put trails on this piece of land that you own. One of the legal terms in that contract would be that like you can't develop this land outside of like what's considered passive recreation and conserved open space, right? And so if they did do that, then they would no longer, we would have to like rescind the funds, or we would have to, go through some probably legal hoops that I don't fully know that process, but they would be breaking their contract with us. They would not be abiding by the terms of this funding agreement anymore.
The question that I have is, did we establish that timetable?
What do you mean?
Is it,
Right.
is it?
It's in perpetuity is the
It
language.
is in
I
perpetuity?
don't know that we said that.
It's in the guidelines.
That it says into perpetuity?
And made sure that it was.
Because we were talking about like, okay, two things. First, we are not requiring conservation easements, but parks have all kinds of mechanisms for deed restricted property that aren't conservation easements. So we're not requiring a permanent easement in that classic conservation easement sense. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at, right? With
Yeah, it's
like, how do we define?
if we acquire a piece of land, are we
Right.
then obligated to spend bond funds to like remove every invasive species?
No,
Yeah.
And then secondly, though, we did have a conversation about maintenance, and our maintenance agreements aren't into perpetuity on these properties. And so we did seem to give us somewhat of an out on what that term is in terms of if a community built a park, what their maintenance agreement was. Did we not?
I remember bringing up maintenance.
Yeah.
I
I had a
don't
lot of discussion
recall,
about it.
Yeah,
I don't recall setting a particular timeline of how far out they needed to have maintenance. I
We did
re-
not set a particular.
okay,
Yeah, I recall us mentioning and like, well, what is the long-term carrying cost of
Right.
each project?
Yeah. They are
Nice.
required to submit their long-term maintenance and management plan and show that they have the capacity and ability to maintain it as the scope of the project is. But you're correct, we did not say that you have to maintain it in perpetuity, but we did say that the land has to be like open to the public as a passive recreation space in perpetuity. So,
Even if it wasn't under a conservation easement?
I'm making a note of that. In the affordable housing space, perpetuity can be defined as 30 years, 99 years, depending on what funding source you're using, so just make sure it's in those.
Yeah.
Perpetuity, does that not mean forever?
Right,
that's
it
how.
doesn't feel intuitive, does it?
perpetuity in terms of the project, right? The length of time for a project.
In affordable housing
Doesn't-
spaces, when you get permanently affordable housing or affordability in
The
perpetuity,
building.
there's sometimes an actual cap on it, that could be 99 years.
Yeah, that's different from your standard conservation easement that a land trust is protecting.
Right.
Yes. So
So that's an important thing to
needing
remember.
to have specificity is important.
So this private landowner who is asking for a grant could say, well, I have a plan for 5 years to take care of this, but then if I die, my grandchildren own the land, I can't promise you.
So that, the way that I've talked about this with the legal team is like, that's where it would come through in the contract, right? It's because we could require them to put a deed restriction on the land, saying that the land is not going to be used for certain purposes. So, and that's transferable to different landowners, right? So kind of like a conservation easement. And legal wanted us to leave some flexibility in there because obviously different projects are gonna have different landowners, might have different needs, and we want to give ourselves room to have those deed restrictions fit those specific project. But my understanding is like we can put that in the contract terms that there has to be a deed restriction or there has to be an easement or there some other mechanism, legal mechanism to protect the land, regardless of if the landowners desires to. Pardon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
my understanding of
maintenance we're gonna
perpetuity,
say.
whether it's a deed or a conservation easement, would be no mature date. So it would not mature at any event unless it's defined in whatever language that you're using, in which case it probably would not be considered perpetuity. If somebody dies, that deed restriction is going to stay in place unless there's a mechanism already defined for that deed restriction to come off.
Yes. I think I am in agreement with the two.
You can remove deed restrictions depending on what kind they are, right?
Correct.
So we just have to be careful in that language and in explaining how that looks, what the expectation is.
And I think that's why, for your information, Rachel, I think the contract negotiation piece for all of the projects that end up getting awarded is going to be a really important part of this process. Is because per, legal's point, like individual projects are gonna look really differently, and the kind of terms we wanna include in their contracts are gonna look differently, and it's gonna depend on who the landowner is, who's managing the property, like, it's gonna be a very individualized contract. I don't think there's gonna be a one-size-fits-all contract. But I think it's really important that we are hashing this out now, because the more we can prepare for that contract process, the better. Other thoughts and questions on that?
If you look at the worst case scenario and this thing went all the way through all the processes, and it came down to, then we're reviewing it. Being that the Citizens Advisory Board, we're kind of representing theoretically citizens. If for some reason we didn't like it, and we would recommend to the commission, we don't really think this should be approved, it would then be up to the commission to actually make a decision.
Yes.
That would be as far as we could go. Now, after that point, if somebody has the wherewithal to gather a bunch of people to show up at that meeting, at the commissioners meeting, that's the standard way these things happen. So that would be the final, we can do everything we can here, and hopefully it's all perfect and we don't have any problems. But if there ever was, that would be the process, I believe.
Yeah, and on that note, the vision for what that looks like is this group will, based on your review of the score report, based on those presentations and site visits, you'll make your recommendation, and your recommendation will be presented to the commissioners. And so my understanding is that usually a staff person who does that. We'll figure out that.
Yeah.
But you will probably be invited to attend in case you want to be able to justify your recommendations or whatnot, in addition to what the staff person presents at it's a commissioners meeting, they're open to the public, so you can attend anyways, but you'll be there if you want to be there to answer questions or talk it out or whatnot, but a staff person will present your recommendations. The commissioners have the right to say, we want to see the full score report. That will be made available to them. They'll be able to see what all the proposals are, and they'll be able to see what projects you didn't recommend. But ultimately, your recommendation will be presented to the commissioners, and they will make a vote on whether or not to make those budget amendments.
And it could be that these projects, I can't remember, did the easement projects go to briefing first?
No.
So they could go to a briefing first, where there's just more dialogue, open dialogue back and forth with commissioners, ability to ask a lot more questions, really get comfortable with the projects, and then the next meeting, they would vote. So it depends. I could see these going to briefing first.
I think these probably will, just because the conservation easements did not go to briefing first, but we had a very well-established process that's been in place for selecting those projects, whereas this is an entirely new process. So I imagine they will probably want this to come to briefing first. And as Jennifer was saying, that's an opportunity to have more conversation, and they'll be able to ask some questions and you can answer them.
They can always do that during a meeting, but
Yeah.
Generally they like to
Do it in the
get get a firm understanding
Yeah,
in briefing.
exactly.
And I just want to make one delineation that we were talking about two different things. There's a recommendation of the project, and then once those projects are recommended and adopted, contracting comes afterwards. So this group will not be involved in the contracting process for those.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that that's
Yeah.
clear, and that those contracts don't go back for approval again because the project's already been done.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. But I I do think even though that process will be after your review, I think these points and these conversations are really important because like, as I said, we're figuring out what that's gonna look like.
For
And
sure.
so if you guys have
Yes.
concerns, we need to.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, and then to your point, Bob, the commission, they do have obviously the prerogative to fund what they want to fund, so. Bob Turner, I saw you unmute for a second. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just so I'm clear on one thing, the primary project type improvements. Can you describe a little bit more examples of improvements? Because I thought our primary focus was land conservation, whether it's easements or acquisitions. Improvements, if we're talking about using funds to build trails on land that's, I assume this has already got to be conserved land. There's some kind of easement on it in perpetuity for public to use. We're not going to improve land for a 5-year period, where it's forever. And so that brings in that maintenance question, like who's going to maintain those improvements forever? So can you just elaborate just a little bit on improvements, what that means?
Yeah, so a lot of the examples of improvement projects that are in that 12 applications are municipality owned land. So there's a municipality that owns a plot of land. There's some examples where that land is already conserved, and then there's some where that land is not already conserved. In the instance where the land is not already conserved, that's when we would do these contract mechanisms to put either a deed restriction or an easement or some other legal thing on the land to protect it, in addition to funding these improvements. So one of the examples, if there's a plot of land that a municipality owns, it's already protected. If they have a restriction on what the land can be used for, and they want to apply for bond funds to be able to put some hiking and mountain biking trails on that land and open it to the public, because currently that land is not technically open to the public. The public has been legally, I guess, using it for outdoor recreation purposes already, but they want to go ahead and make that an official passive recreation park that the municipality is planning to maintain and manage. They would own and manage the property. They are seeking the bond funds in order to put those trails on the property. So that is kind of the most common example of what an improvement project looks like. There are some examples where instead of it being a municipality who owns the land, it's a nonprofit. So there's also like a summer camp that has a property that they I don't know if it has a conservation easement on it yet, but they're in the process of putting one. They are also seeking bond funds so that they can put hiking trails on that property that will be open to the public. Currently, that property is not open to the public. So in both of those examples, we are opening new passive recreation land to public use. And the funds will be used to put these trails and other improvements on the land.
Great, thanks, Jill.
I'm thinking that maybe Robert was thinking of this. I don't know. We sort of always had this idea that the bond was for protecting land and passive parks and that kind of thing. But if there were a shift over all this money to all the applications were for improvements and not as much for protecting a piece of property, that's kind of I guess that's a question to ask. Could that happen? Could it be 80% improvements and only 20% trying to protect land?
One thing to consider is maybe the improvements will allow it to be open to the public.
Yeah.
So it will develop the
That's a good
trails in
thing.
order to be able to utilize land that is previously sat just protected, and so maybe that's one way to think about it. It's certainly not every way, and there's certainly projects that would fall outside of that. So I think that's the difficulty in discussing projects before we have them exactly in front of us, is there's so many what ifs or possibilities. But I think where this where we want to be really clear is what are those boundaries? What are those expectations that we set up in that rubric to make sure that we have clear direction on how these projects should be assessed so that we're meeting the goals of the bond. And if
that
we're
that was
not sure
clearly
about that,
And that is
yeah.
clearly communicated in the application.
Yeah,
Be sure. And we looked at that, that's why, that's the revisiting them. Once you have a project, you look at the application, you look at your goals and make sure that everything is congruent.
And I will say, like, Jennifer, I think that's a really important distinction, is there's like this opening the land to use of the public, and a number of these projects as well, you know, the land is currently open space, but that doesn't mean it's always gonna stay open space, and if they aren't able to make either the bond funds happen or other funding sources that they could potentially tap in order to put trails or to do these other improvements, like, there's no guarantee that land is gonna stay open space. That land could potentially go to development if it doesn't already have a deed restriction. The number of properties that are applying that already have some sort of easement on it is very small. I think it might be like 2. So that's not that's not the norm. The norm is land that is open space right now, but is not currently protected. And if it does receive bond funds, it would be protected either way. But yes, I do think, per Allison's point too, we need to hash all these things out so that when you guys do your review, you can say, is this project it meets some of these criteria, but is it in the spirit of what we wanted to fund with this bond? And that's what y'all get to do. That's why you're here. You get to help make those decisions. Okay, so that is the update on the process. I did want to take a moment and look at the score report that I shared with all of you over email. I did not print it off because it's in Excel, and I tried to print it and it did not go. So, well, I'll just show it on my computer, and I will try to zoom in really far so that it is visible.
Has it changed?
Has it changed? No, but I did not share a score report with you guys in January. This template was generated more recently. Zoom in. Guys, all right. So, and this is a draft, and this is based on what you guys want to be able to see, so criticize it to your heart's content, and I will adjust it to meet what you guys need. So in this score report, there will be a tab for each project, and that's where I will compile the scores that the scoring committee. This is just an example. This is not a real project. I just put in random numbers. But for each project, there'll be a tab, and I will compile the scores that the individual scorers have submitted, as well as the comments that they have made for those projects. And you'll be able to see score 1 gave it a 4 for conservation and environmental impact, but a 2 for safety. You can see what their comments are. That will be there for each of the 4 scorers on our scoring committee. And then at the top, we'll have the compilation. You can see what the average score is on each criteria for that project. You can see how the weight plays into it to give it a total score out of 500. You'll also be able to see, the basic project information of what it's called, who's applying, the project type, what their funding request is, and a brief description of the project. Then the summary sheet will have all of the projects, and then it'll have what their total score is out of 500. It'll again have the type, the funding request, and who the applicant is. And then for each of the criteria, it'll have what their average score was, and scorer notes. So this will look like a list of, let's say, 10 projects. I will sort it so that the highest rated or the highest scoring projects are at the top. But you will be able to go to each project if you want to see, okay, this project got a high score, but their average score for safety is really low, and we wanna go look at the individual project and see what the score notes were about why they scored safety so low, you can do that. You will also, if you want to look at the actual applications themselves, you'll have access to that too. This score report will just kind of put all of the headline information in one place for you all to review. Any thoughts on the score report? Critiques on the score report? Something missing that I should add in? More information?
It's very thorough. Yeah, I'm glad you have the comments of the scorers.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
And I think those comments will be, again, like really important because as I showed in the update, you know, our scoring committee has staff from different departments, and I know that was very intentional because obviously somebody from our parks department is bringing a different perspective than somebody from our planning department, than somebody from our human rights and equity department, and so on. And so you'll be able to see, okay, the parks person scored this feasibility at a 4, but planning scored it at a 2. Like, what were their thoughts on why that happened? And I want you guys to have access to that and be able to probe it.
So if the right arm and the left arm don't know what they're doing, we get to see all the arms of the octopus, so to speak.
Exactly, you get to see all the arms. And again, you all have the right to pick what projects you want to probe further. The scores are supposed to help with that, but that doesn't mean you have to only probe further into the top scoring projects. If there's a project that you think looks really interesting, but maybe it had a, you know, middle range score or something, you can still choose to dig further into that. Likewise, if there's a really high scoring project that you think doesn't align with the values of the bond, like, you don't have to make that part of your recommendation. So, and also if you want to probe further into all the projects, you can do that. I think that'll probably depend on how many projects there are, if you want to do that or not, because that could be a lot of time. But yeah, this should hopefully help you guys make that decision of what projects you want to do.
And the site visits will help. If we decide to do a site visit, that could change what we see on the scoring.
Yeah,
Make us think, yeah.
And it's a flexible process. So say we get 15 applications and you decide that you want to dig further into 5 of them, but as you get into that process, you're like, you know, there was another project of that 15 that I kind of wish we can adjust. You don't have to commit to we're only gonna look into these 5. It's a flexible process, but you guys have control over that.
Okay. So what we're going to get is a sheet that shows how the staff rated.
Yes.
Total rating for each one. So then that's presented to us, and then we have discussions among ourselves. And then do we do our own individual rating?
No. So
Do we vote?
You do not score. So what this subcommittee is going to do is you'll see what those scores are. Those scores are supposed to help you, guide you guys in deciding what projects you want to dig into and how the staff who are like, you know, in this work on the ground every day thinks these projects pan out. And then, but you guys make the ultimate recommendation, right? So I guess,
how does that happen?
So that will happen in these discussions, right? So I will send this score report, or whomever will send the score report to you all ahead of your meeting with plenty of time to give you a chance to look through it and come up with your individual questions and things. We'll have a meeting, you guys will discuss the score report. Maybe you'll be able to make a decision of which projects you want to dig into further and come to a consensus about that in that meeting. You might find you need a special meeting to give yourself more time. You can figure that out. But you will discuss your opinions on which projects in that list that you want to dig into, and you'll come to a consensus as a group and say, we want to look at these 5. The staff will help coordinate those presentations and site visits. Again, if you change your mind during that process and decide you want to look into another project,
Say, I'm sorry, we just lost sound on remote.
among ourselves.
Yes.
Gotcha.
I know we're running on time, so I did just want to briefly give I guess we have to pause for public comment first. Is there anyone for public comment? Okay, no one's for public comments, but for next month's meeting for April, I'm going to share out those LCAB presentations that they received, so you can see what the kind of project presentations look like on their end. I will also come up with like a template presentation of what I think, well, what I and you all think is the information that applicants should share when they come and present to you. And so at the next month's meeting, I want that to be a big focus of what information you want to get out of the site visits and what information you want to get out of the project presentations.
So this process is very much mirroring the way LCAB process works in terms of projects come in, staff reviews the projects, kind of scores them, even though, as we've discussed, score isn't the only element that's considered, but to help the committee kind of sift through and get an easy, the scoring is supposed to help everyone not have to get into the weeds of everything. And then they discuss it, they go out, they do a site visit, they come back, they get a presentation from the landowner, and then discussion happens on whether they recommend this project going to commissioners or not. So I think that it's a very similar, for anybody that's on LCAB, I think it's very similar process. And the whole idea to try to be efficient with your time, but still give you really the hands-on meat of getting out and seeing the projects and meeting with the project presenters to really ask all the questions that don't come up in an application.
The only difference is that we actually do score them on the LCAP.
Oh, on LCAB, you right, Ag Advisory,
But-
right,
but-
you guys score them,
But
that's right.
I like the fact that you're doing all this work and we will see
You'll see it
all
all,
of this
yeah.
information. That saves us.
That's really LCAB, you guys still do it yourselves.
Yeah, we work hard.
You guys work hard, you do.
And I think part of why we decided not to do it that way for this process is it just provides like another level of objectivity. Where like, again, the staff that are on that scoring committee, they have really on the ground familiarity with like what a parks project looks like when you're trying to develop it, like what the maintenance team, they know like what's involved and required to maintain a property like this. So they can kind of give that objective score, and then you guys get to make the really, not subjective, I mean, it's kind of subjective, but you can make the decision based on like your best judgment and your knowledge, and your understanding of what the community is hoping to see from this bond.
It is different.
Yeah.
In that case, the land trusts go out and do yearly inspections, and they're just trying to protect the land, and this involves a lot more intensive city or county activity and liability and maintenance and all that. I mean, it's a different situation. So this makes sense to me. I don't have a problem.
And then in April, I'll also just give you guys another update. I mean, then we'll know how many applications we received and the full makeup of that total. So I'll give you guys another update on what the applications are looking like, so you can be primed for when your turn to review. Any other thoughts or questions as we wrap things up?
Robert, you guys got anything else to add? I've been running my mouth a lot, I think.
I do not.
No, Bob, I think you're right. You know, we trust in the LCAP process, we trust that the land or conservation organizations are going to spend their time and efforts and money weeding out projects and bringing to us. I mean, they're spending a lot of time and energy bring those projects to us. So that's kind of the filter that we use there. You're right. This is a different animal, and glad to have staff involved to help in that regard. Sure. This has been a very helpful meeting, though. Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we can adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
But I do want to say, we're gonna miss you, Jill.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll miss you guys too.
but we'll see you again, right?
Yeah, you will,
In April, in May, in June.
yeah, pending my job search.
Unless, yes, pending that.
But hopefully, yeah. Thank you guys, I appreciate it.
And the next
Bye,
meeting
everybody.
is the 16th of April.